Hello, good afternoon, LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today. We're rounding up our Evergreen webinar series. We've been talking about Evergreen now this is week number 3. And so thanks for joining us again. And just a little reminder about who we are and what we do. Yeeboo Digital team, full service marketing and fundraising agency. And I'll let my awesome colleagues tell us a little bit more about what we do here at Yeeboo as well. But we're working to empower nonprofits to lead with digital. And so Evergreen has just been coming up consistently as something we're advising clients on, and I think it's not well understood. So I'm going to jump right in, let my awesome colleagues introduce themselves. So first, Trevor.
Hi, everybody. I'm Trevor Rickman. I'm the lead digital strategist at Yeeboo Digital. So working with clients to build and execute Evergreen campaigns and more generally looking at sort of digital fundraising strategy for some of the organizations we work with.
Awesome. Perfect. And Eric?
Yeah, everybody. Eric Rubidoux, founder and CEO here at Yeeboo Digital, about a 20-year or so digital and technology fundraising person. Love all things related to it. And yeah, I spend a lot of my time working with the leadership team here and working with our organizational partners and potential partners on finding alignment and figuring out how we can help.
Awesome. That's perfect. And so, like I noted, this is going to be webinar 3. We're focusing today on the idea of integrating ads with those nonprofit content strategies. So how does Evergreen play with your paid media? And so part 1, we kind of started it off, and I'm going to circle back a little bit to where we started, which is part 1 was all about just Evergreen marketing and what it is and what do those kind of strategies look like. So I'm going to let Eric kind of just succinctly kind of pull together what that Evergreen marketing means, or at least what it means to our team.
And emphasis on succinctly, which is not always my strength. So really, when we talked about Evergreen, it's just this idea of being perpetually in market and leaning on the concept and the power of momentum to really strengthen your organization's position. And whether that's in email marketing or paid media, it's all about constant presence so that you're actually benefiting from top mind share and top of mind, as opposed to sort of the campaign windows that we tend to operate in, which is sort of like we're in market and then we're gone, and then we're in market and then we're gone, but rather the sort of continuous upward trend of awareness and action and revenue.
Awesome. And I think this is kind of where we started internally as a team talking a lot more about Evergreen, because, Giving Tuesday, end of year, and we see this huge rush among clients trying to get into market all of a sudden. And so what can we do differently that maybe sustains us throughout the year, right, with Evergreen? So I'm going to let Trevor jump in, though, here. And we had a part 2 that was all kind of focused on email content strategies and Evergreen. So could you give us a little bit of a just high-level overview of what that means to you, Trevor?
Yeah, I think, we wanted to hold that session largely because what we've seen with our clients is often they're Evergreen, though it's probably not the best word to describe it, email strategy largely consists of onboarding series, right? That there's no consistency in the way that email is typically structured within organizations. Often, just because the way the organization was built, it largely relies on things like a direct mail calendar. So really what we're trying to emphasize with clients is again, creating some consistency with what you're sending to your constituents. Largely for us, what that's looked like recently is actually extending that onboarding series to much longer than, traditionally most organizations would look at kind of an onboarding series. And we're shifting away from language like series and more toward things like journey. Mostly, because we're recommending, as we'll talk about today, things like Evergreen paid media, what is it you're doing to sort of supplement that journey for people who are new to the organization and making sure that you're providing some consistency in how they're communicated with?
Awesome. Okay, that's perfect. Great place to start. I am going to throw on my headphones in a minute here, everybody, because there is a thunderstorm happening that is wild. And this is February in Canada. Shouldn't be a problem, but it is at the moment. So we're going to jump in now. to talking about, you know, this final third part, which is all about Evergreen and paid media. So we do have some kind of, you know, direction to this conversation, but if you have questions as we're talking, please feel free to throw things in the comments. Feel free to share what you're doing at your nonprofit, at your fellow agency. Like, how do you look at this Evergreen and paid media? So we're going to jump in with part one here, and we're going to talk about first, how does Evergreen paid media support that long-term growth and sustainability of your nonprofit organization? I'm going to let Trevor kick us off here and just talking about, you know, how do we start with Evergreen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to clarify kind of what Evergreen isn't. And, you know, it's something that we're starting to have conversations with our clients about. Traditionally, I think there's been this understanding that Evergreen paid media consists of things like your paid search. And while that's technically always on, it's not what we would consider true Evergreen paid media or digital marketing. I think when we're talking about paid media, digital marketing, as it relates to Evergreen, we're talking about channels that are proactive, right? So things that you're actually going out to communicate to your donors. And while search certainly is a great way to collect people who are already looking for you, it's not necessarily a great way to get your brand, mission, cause, and sort of donation or solicitation asks out in the wild. When we're talking about why it's important to have that sort of consistency, I think for us, the major reason is really, as Eric alluded to, you're able to capitalize more effectively on momentum. You know, historically, most organizations kind of activate some of these paid media, digital marketing channels during times, sort of campaign periods that are really dictated by a direct mail calendar, right? And when are you sending your direct mail? Typically that's 4 to 5 times a year. And that's typically when we get calls, and we can kind of set our clock to when we know we're going to we will start to get calls. Certainly at end of year, there's typically a fall or a spring mailing. And those mailings typically coincide with email and you know, maybe some paid marketing activity depending on your budget. It could be acquisition, or you're focused on just sort of supporting that direct mail. There's a lot of benefit that can be gained by being in market sort of over a longer period of time. And we've got a whole bunch of case studies. If anybody would, you know, like to see those, feel free to reach out, that sort of show what those benefits are. Certainly from like a ad platform benefit, you're giving a lot of these really complex algorithms far more time to optimize and learn who your audience is, who's most likely to convert, depending on what your campaign setup is like. You know, if you're looking at return on ad spend, who's most likely to actually donate a lot of money? If you're looking at maximizing conversions, who's most likely to actually just give you a donation in the first place? And certainly depending on what your objectives are, those things can be set up differently and targeted differently. The other thing it does is it keeps you top of mind. I think it's something that we kind of take for granted in the sector is we've got, you know, for a lot of the organizations we work with, they've got this incredible brand recognition amongst their existing population, but we kind of forget that it's an incredibly saturated space. And as much as we, you know, don't want to admit that we're competing with some of these commercial entities, yeah, we are. And, you know, so much of our feeds now, regardless of platform, are filled with other things. And so just making sure that the general public, your donors, potential supporters are kind of aware of what you're doing is crucial, so that when these campaign periods come up in times where you really want to raise a lot of money, you're not having to re-educate the population, which I think is where a lot of organizations get caught up, or where some of the downfall we see is in some of these paid media campaigns is a lot of what's being put out there is just asks, right? It's you go to your existing population, you go to a new audience, and you're asking for money. And you're not necessarily telling them why you need it, why it's important, what you're doing or what you have been doing that requires some sort of financial support. I think that was an answer to your question and maybe a few others.
We're just jumping right in here, right? Diving in. Yeah. I do think that's really good points, Trevor. And I mean, we often talk about hospitals and hospital foundations, right? Are always an interesting, you know, like obviously the market is in some ways the same, and they're often competing against each other, or in a certain city you have multiple hospitals. Obviously there is a level of competition there that is going to exist regardless.
Yeah.
And so kind of being in market all the time is going to probably be more important for certain organizations for sure, but maybe it's something that all organizations should be considering. Do you have anything you'd like to add to this, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think Trevor sums it up pretty well, but I mean, I think the two big pieces really are like, it's the continuity. Like when we're in campaign windows and we put all of our eggs in this sort of campaign basket, it's also possible that we don't get it right? Like you could put all of your energy into a campaign and the campaign can flop. And there's no, what you really see in a campaign scenario is like there really isn't usually a way to recover from that. It's just that's what happened and we move on to the next campaign. In Evergreen, it's like, the swings are less volatile. Like you're just sort of constantly learning, you're just sort of constantly progressing and building on that. And it's not to say that there aren't campaign moments that you can lean into, but it's really, it compounds on the momentum, but it also sort of reduces the volatility, which I think can be really beneficial, because it's disappointing if an organization puts all their energy into something and then the campaign just kind of goes and it doesn't really land how they wanted it to land. And then for me, that I think that I like that for one of the reasons that it really stands out, I think.
Yeah, and I think this leads perfectly into our next piece we're going to talk about is, how can we use this evergreen marketing tactics to leverage and create trust, create connection with your audience? And obviously that's going to happen over time. So I'll let you kick this one off, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, specifically in the paid media space, you have to think about put yourself in the shoe of the audience, right? Like who are you marketing to? What are the ad units? Where, what's the placement? But then think about you don't know an organization, and maybe you just saw, your first, maybe it was just your first short form video in a reel or something, and you've seen, but we know it takes a decent number of actual, the repetition, the impressions are there, they're real, you need that. And so no one's going to remember you if they don't know you off the first impression. So now, to build trust, well, you have to basically become part of the consciousness of the target audience, right? You have to be speaking to them and around them enough that they are going to say, oh yeah, I know that organization, because they have to go from not knowing that organization to that, I kind of know that organization, to maybe engaging with something, right? You have to create that space where their mindset is shifted and they've let you into their brain, essentially. And so the value in trust is that you have to be able to take these sort of small steps and lead someone down a path. And in a campaign window, you just don't have the time, right? Your campaign window is 3 months if you're lucky. Sometimes they're 3 weeks, and that's just not enough time to go from zero in awareness to, maybe I am going to support this organization. Now, emergencies, things like that, those are totally different, right? But if we're just talking pure, I don't know you, I'm out on the internet, you're talking to me, you're trying to create awareness about your organization, about the work that you do, that takes time. And that time, and coming at me from a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different platforms, is what creates the trust, right? That constant presence and that sort of hum of your brand around me is what creates the trust. And so, it's almost essential that we're actually thinking about Evergreen when we want to create trust, because we can't create trust in the same way in a campaign window. The windows are too short. We're usually talking about something very pointed, whereas in Evergreen, we're talking a little bit broader. Again, campaign moments, things can come in and out, but we're talking broader strokes about what the organization is doing and the impact that they're having and that kind of stuff. So to me, that's one of the real benefits of I'm probably going to say that everything's a real benefit, but it is one of the things that stands out to me, is that when you want to create trust, you need time.
Yeah,
because it's the only you need those impressions, you need that repetition. So it's certainly one of the big things for building that trust.
Well, and you're always trying to there is timing in this as well, right? Someone may see your ad one time and it, for whatever reason, doesn't resonate. It's the day, it's how busy they are, all of those pieces. So I am as guilty of this as anyone else. You kind of get in this mindset, especially when you're a marketer, where you're like, well, everyone is so bored with the things I'm putting out. They see it all the time. But like, do they see it all the time? I don't know. I can't even describe how many ads have gone by my screen because it's all like white noise. But you know, an Instagram reel at probably 9 p.m. is going to hit me way more than if it was 8 a.m. because that's just for me the time of day when I'm actually like, okay, brain's slowly shutting off. I want to sink into this. Do you have a well thought out story about, you know, how you're supporting children in Asia? I'm probably like, I'm more likely to watch that at that time. So I think that's the cool thing about, you know, a longer evergreen strategy is that you sometimes, you know, there's a timing component, there's a when the message hits, there's where that person is at in their life. So, you know, thinking that it's old news and that everyone has seen it is not likely in today's day and age. Trevor, do you have anything to add to that on that building trust and relationship piece?
I think tactically what this looks like is shifting a lot of your paid media efforts, at least on the acquisition side. And truthfully, there's probably some benefit, or there is some benefit to doing with your existing audience, but certainly on the acquisition side, shifting your paid media objectives to things like landing page views to website visits as opposed to conversions, right? It's a way cheaper activity to just drive traffic than it is to look for conversions. And that's simply because you're asking the algorithm to look for volume and not value. Right? When you're telling the algorithm to go look for value, it's looking for a very specific person, and thus it's costing more to actually find that individual in these ad platforms. I think some of the complication that we encounter when we approach clients with this strategy is that there's some weird overlap now in a way that there didn't used to be between what is considered sort of communications and brand activity versus fundraising activity. Right? Like what we're talking about is historically been understood to be communications and brand. Eric and I have kind of jokingly been describing it to clients as like conversion phase 1, because it can often be a more tolerable pill for fundraisers when you're talking about priming an audience for eventual conversion. But ultimately, you're just trying to teach the audience who you are. And so I think one of the first steps that we like to take with clients is like getting your communications teams and your fundraising teams together and starting to figure out how you can cooperate on this kind of activity, because it isn't traditional brand and it's not traditional fundraising. Obviously, your brand and comms teams have specific objectives that aren't necessarily related to cultivating new donors, but it's important that you're having those conversations and figuring out how to, you know, allocate the budget and where that budget comes from and from whose line. You know, we look at, and I think we've talked about it before, but a blended return on ad spend. And that's where that concept really starts to become important, is the landing page view, while not specifically fundraising related, is still a fundraising activity, right? You take that cost into consideration when you look at how much it costs to acquire the eventual donor. You know, when you blend it with that quote unquote brand conversion phase 1 activity, and it'll give you a real sense of your acquisition costs in these channels. So I think it for us is really about tactically setting up these campaigns in a way that makes sense to increase the volume, figuring out how to cooperate or facilitate cooperation between teams. And then, you know, what does the actual user journey look like? So it's not just about driving them to the homepage, but what do we want these new audiences to know? If their eventual objective is fundraising, then we probably want them to know what the impact is. We need them to have a basic understanding of the core mission, the value statement. And so do your existing web properties have a place where that stuff is easily digestible? What we find is often not. I mean, you as an organization probably have an about us page, but it's information. It's not objective focused. You're not planning to do anything with the people who visit those pages intentionally. So we end up looking at how to create a landing page, possibly revising that about us page so that it is more about cultivating prospective donors. Yeah, it's an interesting time where brand and comms kind of now have more of a gray area than I think they ever did, especially as organizations are looking to quote unquote grow their new file through digital or grow their files through digital. putting out, and I'm sure people attending have experienced this, when you're looking for acquisition from a new audience online, it's often not a successful activity. And mostly that's because, as Eric said, you're putting out your initial impression is in a 3-month window at the end of the year, straight to an ask. So using Evergreen, using these different types of campaigns to prime that audience in anticipation of an ask, knowing that they've been to a website. And then, of course, if you only have a limited budget, you can do things like create engagement markers, which dictate who in your funnel received the donation ask. Did they stay on the page for 30 seconds? Did they scroll through 75% of it? Did they click or watch certain things that would give you an indication that they've actually learned something? So you can get super specific about who then you're actually asking for a donation, rather than just sort of shotgun approach everybody with an initial donation, and your cost of acquisition skyrockets to $300, $400, $500 for an OTG, which of course isn't at all sustainable for anybody, unless you have a huge gift and then keep doing it.
Yeah, then carry on. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to note too that, when you're building a journey or a funnel in digital marketing and paid media, not everybody who goes in the top goes all the way through. You're talking percentages, right? You bring in, you have 100% of people that come to this webpage. Well, to Trevor's point, 20% of them might engage in a way that you say, oh, that's valuable. The other 80%, move on. Maybe you get them somewhere else, but you have to just kind of expect that not every target audience that you point at is going to be 100% of that audience. You're dealing with small percentages, but you're dealing with reinforcing a message continually, increasing those impressions. So you're building that trust for that group of people that are doing the things that are saying it's worth continuing to invest in them.
Yeah. Well, I think there's even now we're starting to realize, and so much of what Trevor's saying, I've absolutely seen and heard from many other nonprofit orgs, but we're also looking at a generational shift, right? I mean, 50 years ago, the majority of people still had some sort of religious affiliation, which dictates a donation, right? Of some sort. That was just part of culture and society that has shifted really greatly. I mean, we all talk about, recession and downturns and things like that happening right now. And then also just there's this shift away from giving because that's what we do to giving because it's something we really care about. And that can't be understated. I think when it's funny because, I know Trevor's throwing out OTG and ROI and all of these, very marketing friendly terms. But there's also a core piece of this that's really just about connecting with people, and connecting with people takes time. Relationship building takes time. It doesn't happen in a 3-month sprint where you put up some ads on Pinterest and assume that those people who have never heard about you are going to care enough to continue a relationship, right? So it's just, smaller nonprofits would look at it and go, oh, well, we'll just call 50% of the people on file. Larger nonprofits are going to look at that and go, well, that's not sustainable. They're only going to have someone who has a major gift, role necessarily. And so paid media kind of bridges potentially that gap of well, we have email and we do this as well. And we also have socials, and paid media is like a cornerstone then of relationship building, but we don't look at it like that because it looks more like a tool, right? Than a true way to build long-term connection.
Yeah. I think that's it's a good point, Tasha, in terms of your expected timeline. I think, the conversation we have with clients who do want to take a look at doing something like this conversion phase 1, this relationship building, call it whatever you want, brand building, is that it's not a fun 6 months. It's not, there's no immediate return tied to this investment, right? You're kind of shooting in the dark and hoping that your message is resonating with the right population of people. And as Eric said, you can set up engagement markers to make sure that that's the case. You refine your landing page, you refine your engagement markers to make that pool of people who did provide value, who we see value in, a little bit larger. But ultimately, there's no feedback loop beyond sort of the 8 to 12 month point, in which point you start to see returns. And we're seeing it with a client now who's relatively new to market, who hadn't done any paid media. We put these ads into market 12 months ago, And they only just started to see some real returns in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, but it's sustainable revenue. It's people who are coming back to the website, continuing to donate. The renewal rates amongst existing donors are coming up. It's proving to do what we initially said it was going to do. But there were months of conversations where they wanted to pull and we said, hold on, and they wanted to pull. And we probably had moments of doubt where we weren't sure if it was going to work. It's not an enjoyable marketing activity. But if you're looking to grow your donor file, it's the only meaningful way to go about doing that, right? It's in the same way that, you know, the example I give to all of our clients is athletic greens. In the same way, or Casper mattresses is what Erica said to others, is that you just put this message out enough for people to sort of recognize the name and want to know more, and then sort of become attached to the mission and cause of the brand. It's a
long game.
It is, and that's exactly it. And long games aren't, you know, like no one loves a long game. That doesn't sound like fun, right? Like I have to wait. I want instant gratification. This is the internet. No, it takes time, and that's just part of it. The good thing is that in the shooting around in the dark space at the beginning, we have boatloads of data we can look at. So unlike, it might feel a bit like we're shooting around in the dark, but we've got the data. We're refining, like this is, like any campaign, like I was sort of referring to earlier, right? Like you put it all together and you launch it, and sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you don't even know why. And this is no different. You're still putting something into market. You're still bringing something, to that first, that you have to put something into market to figure out what you can optimize about it, right? Yeah. So that first step still has to happen, but then you've got data, then you've got opportunity to look and say, oh well, this audience is doing significantly better than this other audience, and I wonder if we should do more about, so you start to have data points you can look at, and then you can start to refine it, and then as you start to refine it, then it starts to actually get exciting.
Yeah.
Well, and this leads perfectly in to this next question, which is, what is this role of data analysis going to be in refining and enhancing, ads for Evergreen campaigns? And I'm going to start with Trevor on this one.
I think we're probably, the team and I are probably self-confessed data nerds. Like, it just is how we make decisions, and as there's certainly an element of at least initially, in terms of the creative development and positioning, gut feel, right? You kind of know who your persona is and what their interests are, and you develop generally around what you believe that will resonate with that population. But you'll get told pretty quickly based on the data whether or not you were right or whether or not you were wrong. And I think more often than not, at least on our first round, we're wrong more often than we are right, which is why we approach sort of campaign development and campaign go lives in a very particular way. We like starting small and testing a wide range of creative amongst a wide range of audiences and seeing what resonates well with whom. Yeah. Our approach to data is essentially using it daily, right? Are the click-through rates holding up, which is how many people are clicking through your ads to the landing page? What are the engagement markers like per particular audience that you've chosen to serve the ad to? Which creative, which headlines? Like we're constantly iterating our campaign creative and our campaign approach and structure to make sure that we're making the best use of the budget available. I think the other piece that's often missed is and data that's not often looked at is how are the other channels. If we know there's core channels that are better at doing certain things, right? Like Meta and Google are quite good at conversions. Then there's places like connected TV, digital out of home, that are really good at impressions, but not so good at conversions, largely because you can't click on a bus stop.
You can try.
You can't do it. But are those channels doing what you need them to do as it relates to promoting the click in your conversion channels? And we look at a lot of that data as well. how, do we pause or start or increase budget in certain places? And do we see dramatic changes in the places that we're actually able to see action in? There's a lot of different data points that we look at to kind of understand where some of those more ethereal channels that don't necessarily have immediate feedback mechanisms. There's things like in connected TV, did somebody watch your whole ad? But again, they're forced to if they want to keep watching their episode of Drive to Survive, which I'm currently watching this. So, we really want to make sure that we're using all of the readily available data to iterate as best as possible before we really look to increase kind of our budgets, which has always been our approach. Slow roll the beginning of your campaign. So by the time you're either in campaign period or really want to turn things up, you're confident that what you're putting into market is really going to work. Which again is a real benefit of Evergreen, right? You have that time. You don't have to go full bore all at once. Yeah.
I like that a lot. And I think, when we talked about the hospital, like foundation example, there are potentially 4, maybe 10 different groups of people. Like there's going to be the people who were served by the hospital that maybe you're aiming at. There's the people whose loved ones were in the hospital and came out of the hospital and you're thankful for that. There's maybe loved ones who you lost at the hospital. There's, there's the whole like community vibe of supporting your local hospital. Like there's all these different ways that you're going to look at, and those are going to potentially need very different ad strategies. But at the beginning, if you've never run an Evergreen campaign and you've always just focused in on end of year giving, which we know also attracts a different audience than the rest of the year, it can, this type of ad spend can be really informative of looking at this entire file of potentially tens of thousands of people and going, how do we tag and bucket these people, right? So it can even help your long-term segmentation and really, we talked about email 2 weeks ago. It could really help your email as well feel more personalized by taking a look at what happens in your ads as well. So they're quite complementary.
Yeah, it's I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that these different the image that we always show clients in terms of how we set these ads up is sort of a circle of levels, right? Like you have the people that are understand the mission, core mission and cause already. Those people, your existing supporter base, can likely be served an initial conversion ask. They've donated to you before, they know who you are. There's probably some need to educate them on what you're currently doing, but most of that can be fulfilled kind of within a conversion ad. And then you kind of step out based on interest. And obviously we're not in a place, I don't think any business is really in a place where they're serving ads to people who are completely uninterested in the service they're providing, right? You always want to find at least some connection. But the further you go, the more education is required to convince somebody that your organization is worth donating to. Yeah. And so those outer rings of this circle are what's really important is maybe it's not just one landing page view. Maybe it's a landing page view and an email sign up. Maybe it's a landing page view and a download. Like you can baby step them in a way that you don't necessarily have to do with some of those inner circle groups. And so the data really allows us to see, are people progressing through this funnel? How effectively are they progressing through this funnel? And then ultimately, are they doing the thing that we want them to be doing? It used to cost a lot of money to run a focus group. And now we have access to all of these incredible channels where you can do it for $1,000. And I just don't think a lot of organizations are taking advantage of that. There's always a lot of questions internally with our clients about what will and won't work. We have this new communication strategy. We want to test this messaging, but paid media is not necessarily the natural place that they're looking to do that. And I think it's because there's this perception that they don't necessarily want to put it out in public yet. Mm-hmm. And while I completely understand that, in public doesn't have to mean 1 million people. It can mean 10,000 people, and you can get some pretty immediate feedback on whether or not that thing is going to work for a larger audience.
Yeah, it's fun. And even in the, you sort of alluded to it earlier, and you're kind of just talking about it too. Like, when you're iterating creative at the beginning, and when you're trying to kind of figure out where to go, like, it's not what you think when you think about like a campaign launch where you're like, and now everyone's going to see, you know, we're on billboards. No, it's much, much smaller. And to what Tash was saying earlier, like we all see so much advertising. We have so much crossing in front of our eyes and over our ears and fighting for space in our brains, that like your one subpar ad that didn't really perform, like the only person who's ever going to think about that is you. Like, and that's the thing, like organizations are afraid to put, you know, creative out in the market because they're like, oh, well, you know, like no one's going to write an op-ed piece about your subpar ad. Like it's just we're going to learn from it and we're going to move on. Or we're going to find out that this average ad is a knockout and we are going to start to figure out why. And we're going to try to, you know, make other creative that kind of looks like it and just keep building on it. But, you know, I think a lot of organizations are afraid of this idea of testing their way into something because they feel like it's a big curtains up moment when, you know, as Trevor said, like we can isolate 2,000 people and follow them around for a week or two and see how it goes, you know, and if it sucks, they'll move on. You'll move on. It's okay, you know, but it's not as scary as I think some organizations have made it out to be, which is, you know, I think it's a good thing. We just have to change our approach to lean into this idea that, yeah, it's almost like a focus group, right? Like focus groups were people who saw things before it was ready for public. So if you think about it as like, this is your focus group phase, you're learning, yeah, you know, you might throw a few, you know, stinky sardines in there, but that's okay. The focus group's going to tell you what, you know, what to do, what not to do, and you'll learn.
Yeah, that's great. I am going to throw out here in like our last 10 minutes. So if people have questions or whatever, I know there's a lot about this conversation, so many actionable items. It can feel really overwhelming at the idea of starting Evergreen. Like, how does it start? But I think, you know, as these guys are highlighting, there's so much value in it, even just from a data perspective or a, you know, a stewardship perspective, what you can gain from these ads, as well as hopefully new donors as well. So this is probably going to be our last question, or, you know, kind of, we're going to go into, Eric's going to lead us into talking about just the need for like this timely and specific content, and how does this look into the development of your Evergreen paid media. So this will probably be our last question, unless people have questions they'd also like to add in, but take it away for us here, Eric.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and it's a great question because we do get this one a lot, right? Like, okay, we've always operated in campaign windows. How do we start Evergreen, and do we just stop doing all of our campaigns? Well, the short answer is no. You know, you can continue to operate in your campaign windows because unless you know something I don't, I'm pretty sure you don't have every single person already in your campaign window. There's lots of people you haven't talked to yet. There's lots of people that have no awareness of you. So, you know, you can think Evergreen as a great place to start. Evergreen is that cold acquisition warm up, because your campaigns are likely more focused, hopefully, on people who already know you, right? Because you have such a shorter window, so you need to activate people. You know, if you think of it as like, you know, you need to move the needle on someone a little bit. If the needle is way over here, that's a lot of effort it takes to move that needle. But if the needle is already here and you just need to move it a little bit, that's what your campaigns can keep doing, right? That's, you know, campaigns can continue to move the people who already know you, who are aware of you, are, you know, within your core circle, and that's fine. You are, however, going to have to start thinking about like something that's parallel, that's running in the background, that is growing and learning. So yeah, it's going to take a little bit of extra energy, a little bit of extra focus, a little bit of extra resources, creative. Like you know, you have to think of it. It's like that. It's the 6th campaign in your year, but you're actually kind of working on it over the course of the year, and it's building and growing with you. And I think because Evergreen is often focused around, like, as Trevor sort of alluded to earlier, like the core mission and work of the organization, it's not about the specific campaign thing or the specific match that we've got. It's about awareness of the organization and the impact that you're having, and building on that so that people learn to trust you, learn to get involved, take some kind of action, you know, like come closer to the organization. And so for that to happen, you have to start building that stuff in parallel. But you know, I would never suggest, like, you know what, yeah, don't do any of the stuff you're going to do this year. Put it all in there, because as Trevor also said earlier, it takes a while to get off the ground. So don't think you're going to start Evergreen tomorrow and just replace your campaign revenue or activities with it. It's going to take a little bit of time, but it is absolutely worth it, because eventually and over time, you can start to merge these things together. You can start to see, like, okay, how are our campaigns more not isolated events like we have right now with a sort of separate evergreen thread running in the background, but they become campaign moments within our evergreen strategy. And talking about the data, like if you're leveraging, you know, the benefits of having long running campaigns in these platforms, well, the algorithms have learned a lot about you. You've got boatloads of data. You can leverage all of this stuff as opposed to starting from scratch and having to sort of, you know, relearn all those things. So, you know, for me, that, yeah, I don't know, like I think there's just a lot of benefit in Evergreen, the way I see it. But yeah, in terms of getting started, you kind of do have to be intentional about it. You have to think of it like a campaign, think of it like a project. You have to define, like, who are you trying to bring in? What's your budget's going to be? Like, how are you going to structure this? But unlike a campaign, you're going to have a much longer window. You're going to be looking at this over the course of 12 to 18 months with the goal of saying, like, in 18 months, we want to be up here. But right now, and for the first little while, it's going to bump along the bottom, and we're going to learn, and then we're going to start to see some activity. We're going to refine around that, and then we're going to start to see that sort of, like, what is it, the hockey stick, right? Like the sort of you bump along for a little bit, and then all of a sudden things start to click, and you're actually starting to make some real revenue. So, yeah. I don't know. I'm sure you guys have something else to add.
Trevor, you know, for some of our Yeeboo clients who are kind of running or have been running Evergreen for quite a while, like, you know, what do you kind of see when an Evergreen campaign has been running successfully for quite some time? You know, does it feed into like the greater overall marketing like lift in terms of donations and all of those pieces? Maybe you can just speak to that for a second.
Yeah, I think typically what we'll do is we'll run essentially, let's say a really basic funnel, right? Essentially 2 campaigns. One is for website visits, landing page views. One is for conversion. Obviously, there's sort of varying degrees of maturity here. Your landing page views campaign and your conversion campaign have what we sort of have referred to as like off campaign time creative. Right, it's stuff that you can turn on and off whenever an end of year isn't happening, or another sort of flagpole campaign is taking place. During those campaign times, we'll just add the creative in, and then turn it off when that campaign is over. And you know, for a lot of specifically end of year, those ads most often can be turned into learn more ads. Right, you need some other stuff. You need landing pages, you need videos, whatever. But it doesn't have to be drastically different creative. It should look a little bit different so that if somebody makes it through the funnel, they're not seeing the same person twice with just a different button. But generally, same creative concept, same taglines, same colors, like all of that stuff can be applied to the 2 different campaigns. You're just putting people down different roads. And yeah, I mean, you know, what is the result? I think I spoke to it a little bit earlier. We've seen just over a period of time, a lift in overall revenue, both because people are being put further down these conversion funnels and are being asked, sort of more strategically asked for donations in after they've done certain things. And then also because more volume on your website will inevitably lead to more revenue. Yeah. Even if you were to close your eyes and throw a dart at a dartboard and you weren't sure who you were talking to, which is of course not the case, we're being super specific and we know these people have a general interest. Sometimes they get to your website and they just make a decision to donate. And so we've seen that as well, just increasing volume. Nothing else changes. And certainly, again, some of the things we look at are like, can we optimize your donation forms? Does an acquisition for a new person donation form need to look different than a donation form for an existing audience? But if all things stay equal and you simply increase traffic, more people will purchase. Now, obviously, if your conversion rate on your donation forms is like 0.5%, we're probably going to have some recommendations for you. But even if that's the case, that, you know, it's not like everybody who's coming to your website now is within that sort of, as we said, inner circle. There are some cool people and they're converting. And so, you know, we talked about data, it would be an interesting data point to figure out new donors who came through organic search. What is their conversion rate on your website? Because that may give you some indication, plus minus a few points, of how many people from a cold audience may actually end up converting should you choose to run one of these campaigns. Yeah.
Love this. I love this. Oh, so we're coming up right on time and cognizant of everybody's afternoon. But this was awesome. Thanks, guys, for doing this. And I think it really capped off. If people didn't miss number 1 and 2, it's on our YouTube channel, or you can see it on like our LinkedIn if you scroll back a little bit. Reach out to Eric and Trevor. They're fantastic to talk about this with. And partly this all came about because I was having these conversations with them in the background and going, I feel like most nonprofits don't understand half of what you guys are talking about. And it's because it's a lot of work, right? Evergreen is a lot of work, but the return is huge, and it could be huge for your nonprofit. It is a piece of work. It's, creating evergreen content and an evergreen marketing strategy is going to take time, but I think it's really worth, having the discussion as a team and, moving out of the like feast or famine of campaigns that happen around certain times of year. So here's our website. Please, come and check it out. Talk to these wonderful humans. And thanks for joining us today, everybody. Cheers.
Yeah. Thanks, Tricia.
Bye.